Rolling.
Hey. And action.
When we're of a mind, it's going well, and when we're not, it kind of peters out. Thoughts either provoke further thoughts or they don't, meaning that's the kind of end of that road, whatever it was. When you're trying to develop something, it's not a question of kind of competing points of view that you might have a row about. It's just a process of seeing whether things lead somewhere. Joel and I working with each other as related to us working with other people, you might give a note to an actor and it might be fruitful, they do it and you go, okay, yeah. Or it, again, might kind of peter into nothingness. It might just kind of, it might yield something or it might not.
Most of it's mapped out. And J. Todd Anderson, who is their storyboard artist, basically draws their very specific vision of what they're going to shoot. So between them and Roger Deakins and all that, they know pretty much exactly what angles they're going for. And then within that, whatever improvisation you want to go for, they're willing to play with at least a little bit. But then again, with this movie, it was more about, talking about how we want to manifest certain ideas without using dialogue. So that was, should Llewellyn talk to himself again in this scene? Is he going to seem crazy if he talks to himself too much? The fact that there's no music, that the majority of the music is really sound design, ambient sound design, inhales and what you do with your fingers, how you stand, how you grunt, at least in Llewellyn's, thing. When he finds the money, he goes, mm-hmm, like that. And that we actually talked about that. We actually rehearsed different grunts. So it's funny working with them in that way, but it was a really interesting challenge to be able to manifest ideas, like I said, through body language and through other means other than dialogue.
We're not kind of, moving props around. We kind of let them do their thing.
No, they just don't talk, ever, There's just a lack of ego on the set, so any actor that wants to be petted during one of their movies, it's just not going to happen, which is really unnerving in the beginning and really satisfying later on.
And also, since they deal with the visual way before, they're able to focus on actors, and be able to listen. They do a lot of tweaking. They don't do a lot of massive manipulation.
Gotcha. These brothers, beyond the great filmmakers they are great people, so I don't think you can go, this is the top you can get. They are very good in trying to make the actor play in different ways.
I heard that they were making a movie. I got a couple of scenes from the script, and I asked Robert, who again I've known for a long time, I said, would you videotape me? We sent it to the Coens, and the Coens basically, their response was, who lit it?
We thought it'd be really easy because in our minds it's kind of the regular guy, and we thought, well, we just need a good, clean kid. It turns out it's not that easy to embody that without either being dull or being not of the region, which is a bad thing because...
Not convincing as a cowboy in a way.
That you either kind of have or you don't. It's a hard thing to act. Josh actually grew up on a ranch, not in Texas, in Central California, but he wore the cowboy hat before he showed up for this part. I mean, he really just kind of fit in really naturally.
Ethan once said the book was about a good guy, a bad guy, and a guy in between, and he's kind of the guy in between.
Right, just sort of regular person who's caught up in extraordinary circumstances and has one unreflective moment where he decides to appropriate a bunch of money that isn't his and spends the rest of the movie trying to sort of avoid the consequences.
Again, on opposite ends of the spectrum. You have a very human, very innocent, open character on Llewellyn's part, and then you have this other guy.
He's sort of relentless, but there's also something a little bit mysterious about him, I think. You don't quite know where he's come from. We needed an actor to play that I think would be able to flesh it out in a substantial way without giving away too much. So, hence, Javier Bardem.
What Javier brings to a character like this, which you've never seen, is this kind of Spanish openness that he can't get away from. You can't help but lend yourself to who he is, and you can't help but like him. So there's a part of Chigurh, I think, at least from my standpoint as an audience member watching the film, I go, I can't hate the guy.
It's weirdly not a malevolent character, although he kind of scares the crap out of you. It's weird. I don't know what the line is that Javier walked, but it's not exactly an evil character. He's just very uneasy making.
In the book, it's very well described physically, theoretically and philosophically, but it was truly wide open to any interpretation, and it was the Coens and I to decide how do we bring this symbolic idea of violence into a man's behavior. And the first thing they brought is this insane haircut, and since it was my hair, I wasn't very happy because I have to live with that hair for 3 months, but I thought it helped me tremendously to understand this kind of methodical, almost mathematical way of approaching his goals and his duty.
He's the one character in the book that actually departs from a certain sense of realism. He's both sort of real in the book and an idea. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do, I think, as an actor, is to sort of preserve that. And the fact that you have to be human at the same time that you have to embody something else. You have to sort of embody this idea as the character's written.
So you find the humanity within that, and he brings so much charisma to it. I think that's the great thing about this guy, about these bad guys, his bad guy, his Chigurh, is that there's a charisma that you can't help but like the guy, but you know you shouldn't. You want to follow him, which is, so there's 2 or 3 things going on at once that you don't get to see in film usually.
The attitude of Tommy Lee Jones' character in the novel and in the movie is that, yes, things are kind of going to hell and life isn't what it once was and everything is less civil and more violent.
The movie is sort of about this character's perspective on time going by and aging and things changing.
It's a very beautiful landscape, but kind of a bleak, not a picturesque landscape. It's kind of not an easy place to live in. And that's, in a sense, what the story is about. The kind of, it's a harsh environment. He is rooted, he's of that place. He's been the sheriff there for all of his adult life, and he's of the place. He has a sense of humor. I mean, actually, a lot of the humor in the book and hopefully in the movie is his, just sort of in terms of how he expresses himself. And he's just a sort of salt of the earth, yet very sort of canny. He's a very capable sheriff.
A very decent kind of guy. Once I actually get on the set, the only thing that can happen is that something can go wrong. You go on the set and all kinds of things change. And you're open to all kinds of possibilities because movies are made of so many different elements and so many different things sort of go into making something work or not work. And you have to be open to all those things. But that's different from saying, I'm going to rewrite the scene or change the dialogue. The fundamental sort of nature of the scene, you want to sort of work out, or at least we do, before we get on the set. But then you've got to make the scene work at some level dramatically. And it wouldn't be fun otherwise. We both enjoy the actual making of the movie.
You have what are called sides every day, and those are the pages that they're planning on doing. So you know what shots they're going to do, and they stick pretty much to what that is.
Being on the set and working with people is such an extremely social and collaborative process. And while it's true that we prepare maybe to an extent greater than a lot of other directors, who, that's just part of our process, it's also true that we like the process on the set of actually seeing what happens, being open to what happens when you go into a new space, when you're working with new people, be the actors or technical people. And we do have storyboards, but actually we don't look at them very much while we're shooting. I mean, we obviously share sort of the fundamental point of view about the material. On the set, if we're directing a scene, we're just both there. I mean, we would, in a scene like this, block the scene with the actors and run through it and start breaking it down in terms of the shots that we're doing, which are generally dictated by some conceived sort of visual plan. And if there's questions, they're literally asked to the person who's closest to the person who's asking the question.
Actually, there isn't much of a distinction. We kind of both do whatever. It starts with writing the script together, and making the movie is just kind of an extension of that, and there's no real separation of labors.
They're obviously very separate in personality and demeanor, but at the same time, I don't think there was ever a disagreement. It was like, either it had been planned so perfectly before, but that's not because there were so many obstacles that came up that we dealt with, or questions that we had. It's kind of supernatural.
A good 90% of that is a function of the fact that by the time we're on the set, we've gone through the exercise of having written the script together, so certainly at the end of that process, we're in sync we understand the material the same way, or we couldn't have written the script together.